Welcome to the regular July 18th, 2016 meeting of the Finance Committee of the Lake Forest City Council. Will clerk please call the roll?
Certainly. Mayor Schoenheder is absent. Chairman Panaleon.
Here.
Alderman Waldeck.
Here.
Alderman Beidler.
Here.
Alderman Newman is absent. Alderman Reisenberg.
Here.
Alderman Tack.
Here.
Alderman Edelman.
Here.
Alderman Moreno.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on April 18th, 2016. Are there any comments, corrections, amendments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Okay, motion passes. Third item on the agenda is the annual Cemetery Commission report, which is going to be presented by Dennis O'Brien, the Cemetery Commission Chair. Welcome.
Good evening, Chairman and committee members. It's my pleasure to present to you the annual report of the financial situation with the Cemetery Commission. Provided on the presentation is just for point of reference, our mission statement and our investment policy. This is a breakdown pie chart of our overall investments. What I'd like to point out here is, as you see below, our overall growth was 2.7% year over year. That compares to the same time period. The Dow showed a 0.7% decline, and the S&P showed a 1.3% decline over the period. So in both cases, our combined portfolio beat the general market indexes. The other thing I'd like to point out is from the origin of August 2008 through April 2016, we've seen almost a $2.5 million growth in the portfolio, which is roughly 80%. The other thing I'd like to talk to you about regarding our overall accounts, making up those accounts that are managed by William Blair, our investment advisors. And if you recall, last year we went through a vetting of 6 different possible investment advisors and retained William Blair. Amongst our investments with William Blair, roughly 2/3 of those investments are held in 3 holdings. First is the Vanguard Mega Capital Growth Fund, which is a mutual fund that currently has roughly $1.6 million in that fund as of April, which makes up about 1/3 of the investments. That's a mutual fund, so it's a passive account. And as you may recall, a year ago, we made the decision to move to a passive account investment strategy for our large cap investments. The second largest investment is the William Blair International Growth Fund. This is not a mutual fund. This is an active managed William Blair fund. That was roughly $950,000, or roughly 20% of the investment. Based on Morningstar, this is a 3-star out of 4-star rated fund. It's operating at the average level of these type of international growth funds. The third fund is the William Blair Bond Fund, a fixed income actively managed fund, and that was comprised of about $640,000, or 13% of the investment portfolio managed by William Blair. This fund has a 4-star rating. It has surpassed the market for the bond fund over the past year and over the last 5 years. The remaining investments, which makes up the other 1/3 of the account with William Blair, are made up of individual holdings, all less than 2.5% of the overall portfolio. To get to the total investment portfolio of roughly $5.6 million, we do have roughly $716,000 in a cash account within the city of Lake Forest. It is not managed by William Blair. This is the breakdown of the four major categories of investments with our policy range. As you're aware, as we reported last year, because of the uncertainty of the interest rates in the United States, we treat the cash and fixed income investments as one class under the policy range. So those two combined make up 25.7% of the investments, which is within our policy range of 20 to 40%. The other domestic and international are within the policy range. So we're meeting our due diligence and maintaining. The only really other thing to mention, other than the fact that almost a year and a half ago, we extinguished the debt that the commission has. We are moving forward slowly with the restoration of the ravines around the cemetery. As you may be aware, we received a grant of $80,000, which we're starting to proceed, and that will be handling the site preparation and clearing. And that's taking place mostly in this fall. There's no other unusual or exceptional activities within the cemetery other than we had a very strong fiscal year ending April 2016, where we surpassed our budget financially. With that, I open up to questions from the committee.
Questions for Mr. O'Brien?
I have one.
Michelle?
Even combining the cash and fixed income accounts into one class, so to speak, it seems like you have a lot in cash. Do you have a lot? How do you think about that?
It's within, if you look at the policy range that we're trying to maintain, we're basically having fixed income investments between 20 and 40%, and we're at the lower range at 26% if you treat cash. So we have a very conservative approach for our investments. The idea is to protect principal, and that's one of the reasons we moved to an index fund for our large cap, because that pretty much is a stable investment area. For the international and the small and mid cap, we're still active, because that's one area where you can see huge swings in those investments, and the active manage helps us to protect ourselves and be conservative in our investments.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have a couple. Since I've been carrying the bludgeon on this indexing thing for the last 5 years, do you anticipate moving further in that direction as time goes on?
At this point in time, we haven't given that consideration, but again, with using the William Blair Bond Fund and their international fund, that gets very close to being a passive. And as I mentioned last year, because they are William Blair funds, we do not have transaction fees. So the only fees we're paying for those two investments are what's embedded in those funds, which is the same thing that you happen with mutual funds or the Vanguard. The only fees you pay is what's embedded in the fund itself. So those are acting very much like a passive in the way of the fees we're paying. And as was reported last year, we moved the custodianship of the funds to William Blair, which removed those fees.
Yeah, it's good progress. One thing I noted about the International Growth Fund is that, you know, it's rated 3 stars but high fees, and I'm not. Do you feel like you're getting your money's worth for those high fees? This is just Morningstar's evaluation.
The problem with Morningstar, again, is we don't have any overlapping fees from William Blair for their active management, so that helps reduce that high fee. And we feel the job they're doing, we're getting our money's worth in that area. We'd like to see the fees lower, but I think we're getting our money's worth.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Good report, good progress on
Very nice.
the whole management. I mean, it feels like, you're really doing this the way it should be done, so.
Thank you, and it was my pleasure to present. I look forward to doing it again next year. Have a good rest of the meeting.
You won't be presenting with me on the day, it's here.
I'm not sure if that's good or bad.
Yeah, who knows?
Less questions.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. Let's see. Gotta find my way back to where I belong here. The next item on the agenda is going to be presented by Elizabeth Holub, Director of Finance. It's the budget calendar. Oh, I'm sorry.
Closing
Oh,
out.
okay.
Thanks, Diane.
There she is.
Thank you, Chair. It may be a surprise, but we're beginning to start thinking about the FY18 budget process. And so typically at this Finance Committee meeting, we just present to you the basic calendar. We don't envision any major changes to the process or timing of the budget process this year. I would note that using the off Mondays in November and March that we've done the last few years that have been well received, the capital budget meeting would fall Monday, November 14th, and the operating budget workshop would fall on Monday, March 13th. So the basic calendar is provided on page 28 of your packet, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, but also entertain any comments regarding any changes you'd like to see in the process, if any.
Does anybody have any comments or suggestions for improvements to the process? Okay. Thank you very much. I guess that's a point of information then. The next item on the agenda is also going to be presented by Elizabeth Holub. It's the investment policy and investment procedures update and creation.
We've kept with the investment theme this evening, so to provide a little bit of context on this item, the city currently has an investment policy from 2004, and the city has no investment procedures manual at all. And it has been a goal of the finance department to both update the investment policy, but more importantly, to develop an investment procedures manual as outlined and identified in the investment policy, so that as interest rates rise, and I still believe they will eventually rise, we can capitalize on that and begin to move some of the city's funds out of money market accounts and into investment products and hopefully yield higher interest revenue for the city. I would say that we have a very good banking relationship with our primary depository, Lake Forest Bank and Trust, who provides us a very competitive rate on our deposits. But I do anticipate that there will come a time when it will be beneficial to the city to move into other investment products, at least those funds that aren't needed immediately for operating purposes. So that's really the nexus for this. The investment policy was not provided in red line mode because as we worked through it, we wanted to move sections and make some changes to the structure of the document that didn't lend itself well to a red line format. So I received a couple questions related to that. I would offer that when this does come back to City Council, I can certainly provide you a matrix of key components of the current investment policy and the proposed new policy. But we are suggesting no changes to major significant policy items. The collateral requirement of 110% is current. That's not proposed to change. So what we've really tried to do is restructure the policy, take into account GFOA's best practices on investment policies, and also update the authorized investments to current standards and statutory guidelines. So it really isn't proposed to significantly change the way investments are managed at the city. Conversely, the investment procedures manual is completely new. And while the investment policy, both current and proposed, indicate that the finance director is authorized to develop a manual, because it's new, we felt like it was important to bring that to the finance committee and at least allow you an opportunity to review and provide input if there was an aspect of it that you would like to see modified or changed before it goes into place. But with that in mind, I'll be happy to entertain any questions or provide an overview. I would also note that Sophia Anastopoulos is in the audience. She is with Public Funds Consulting, and we contracted with her to assist us in this endeavor. So she's provided input. She's a former employee of GFOA. She's had a longstanding career in public funds investing, and so her input and support was very important to this project. So I thank her for her efforts, and she will help me answer any questions if needed.
Can you remind us what GFOA is?
Government Finance Officers Association,
Okay,
thank you very much. And it is a national organization that serves municipalities, states, and other governmental entities across the country.
Other questions? Councilman Marino?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
So one of the things that I am always looking for is checks and balances, that one person execute and another person check. I saw finance director mentioned throughout the document, but I didn't see any other individual mentioned as either placing trades or confirming trades. How do you intend to manage that internally?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We do have some language that, with this tiny print, I'm going to have difficulty finding, but the assistant finance director would also be involved in preparing reports, reconciling the accounts as part of the monthly close, and booking the actual transactions. So there is intended to have dual approval and dual recording. But we would also be submitting reports to the Finance Committee, so you would see those detailed investment transactions every quarter as a review, but.
And that process would also establish investment parameters, as we saw with the Cemetery Commission's asset allocation strategy. You would have a similar theme and a similar plan.
Yeah, the manual prescribes that annually we would come to the Finance Committee with some basic recommendations on asset allocation. I would say that it's not going to appear very sophisticated at first. We're going to move into this gradually, but eventually, it would potentially look like a percentage range for certificates of deposit, a percentage range for treasuries and agencies, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Michelle, I wasn't looking, I appreciate that question. I wasn't actually looking through I did find the procedures manual a little easier to grasp, I guess, just the concept of that. So, but George, as chairman of the Finance Committee, aren't there things that you do that we do some things, but you do, don't you touch base every month with Elizabeth and see what's
Generally.
Okay, and is that not reflected in here? I mean, I guess I wasn't reading for that level of detail, but.
There are things, right now, because there wasn't a procedures manual for these kinds of transactions, there really isn't a provision for the finance chair to oversee. Now, with basic operating things like the check register, the finance chair has to approve the check register every month, that kind of thing. I think there may be some, before it goes all the way to the Finance Committee,
Some opportunity
maybe there
for-
could be some involvement. It's a very good point. And, that could be another check and balance.
And I hadn't even
You
thought
don't
of
want to
it
have too
until
many
Michelle.
checks and balances, but, after a while, you can't do anything. But certain larger transactions, strategy, establishing parameters, establishing ranges of exposure to various kinds of instruments, those are the kinds of things where there might be some review and approval, prior to going to the Finance Committee for the official sign-off.
Sure.
I think that's a good point.
Well, even in thinking about how to build the agenda for the meetings, because you work with Elizabeth more often than we do, so how to build agendas, how to present certain kinds of things. I mean,
Right.
it seems like if we're doing a procedures manual, to actually put that in makes a lot of sense, and it gets very much to your point, Michelle, about the checks and balances.
And another question that I have, and I don't think I've ever asked this question. In my profession, we sign an annual ethics statement, and it might feel redundant after many years, but it does carry some value. Um, Psychic value, I suppose, to some extent. So I guess I would ask that we consider, especially those that have a fiduciary role, but I think it's a healthy thing across the HR continuum, because it just puts everybody on the spot, frankly, that they're accountable and responsible, and they're making a statement to that effect. So I don't know how that might fold in throughout HR, but certainly in the fiduciary capacities, I think it's important.
I think that's a great suggestion, and I know, for example, in my professional capacity, because I am acting as a fiduciary, and there are certain parameters that we have to follow, and I don't know to what extent this applies in the public sector, but certainly in the private sector, people in that kind of a role have significant personal reporting requirements to tease out any potential conflicts of interest. You know, for example, every portfolio that my family has, a copy of every statement goes to our compliance officer. And I would imagine, you know, best practices would be similar in the public sphere. So I did not see that in here.
We do have that general conflict of interest statement on an annual basis,
This is more.
but this is a little,
Yeah, this is an area where, you know, you're pushing buttons and making transactions happen, and people are
Yeah.
making, making money.
Yeah.
And you wanna make sure that there isn't any kind of inside information being, you know, used beneficially by the employees. So, I assume that there are similar, actually, my public sector clients, I can tell you, I can't buy them a cup of coffee.
That's right.
So,
And I would note to Alderman Moreno's point that there is reference to segregation of duties, but we'll make a point of actually specifying that and who that is, and ensure that there's two people who touch each transaction. So that's articulated clearly in here.
Thank you.
other observations? I had a couple. In the very beginning, on the strategy part, although I think later on there's some reference to using an advisor, I didn't see anything at the front end that indicated that that was likely to be the case. And I guess my instinct tells me it probably should be, and
Okay.
maybe more prominent there. Let's see. And then this is a detail, but on reporting, this is on item 12, I think it is, on page 9. There's a general reference to comparisons to the benchmarks, but it's not specified over what time periods. Now, initially, it'll be, there won't really be the ability to do that, but as time goes on, you'll want to have probably 1, 3, and 5 year, and probably since inception comparisons, similar to what we saw from the Cemetery Commission just a minute ago.
Okay.
And if there are no other comments, I guess this was more of a point of information, but I think it's an interesting, and I guess I should point out for everybody, most of these investments are going to be very close to cash. We're not talking about hedge funds, we're not talking about long, short, and we're not talking about any kind of real significant equity. These are operating balances we're talking about, so this is money that we intend to spend in the course of a year typically. Now, there is a balance, you know, we have these fund balances that transfer from year to year, but to the extent that, I mean, this has to all be highly, highly liquid and highly stable. But in a world of zero interest rates, if you can get 1% by maybe tying up a small portion of the money on a 6-month CD, that makes a big difference in terms of, you know, the ability to have a little more money to spend.
Sure.
You know, I don't recall if it was in here or not, but Is there an exclusion of any derivative or option trading activity?
We're not allowed to invest in those types of products under the Public Funds Act. It's also important, we can't buy stocks, we can't, so it's fairly limited on the types of investments that the Public Funds Act allows us to invest in, so.
It might be worthwhile to footnote that here.
Sure,
Thank you, I didn't remember.
sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Sure.
And thanks for your work putting this together. This is a step forward. Next item on the agenda is other business, just some references to attachments that we have. We have the usual flash report. There's some purchasing statistics that were asked for in our April meeting, some sales tax information about sales tax practices in Illinois, online versus purchased locally or locally in a store. Are there any comments or questions on any of that?
So are we supposed to be declaring stuff? I didn't actually feel like I knew more at the end of reading that, although it was thorough. Are we supposed to be declaring our own purchases, sending the state money?
A few years ago, the state of Illinois added a line to the state income tax return where taxpayers are supposed to report any purchases on which they have not been charged sales tax.
Okay.
And so that was their mechanism to encourage self-reporting.
Are people doing that? Do you know? Anecdotally? Okay.
And
Got to be careful not to give tax advice.
I know. I didn't know whether that was I had heard that had been suggested. I hadn't heard that had been actually.
And if it helps, this was
We have any
actually
tax attorneys
the clearest
for us
article.
to talk about?
This was actually the clearest article I could find. But it does demonstrate just how complicated it is.
I agree.
It is very difficult, and when you look at different types of sales, and what's exempt and what's not exempt, it's very difficult.
Yeah, okay.
TurboTax does ask the question. So you're on the honor system.
So it would be wise to be keeping track of that on an ongoing basis, I guess.
You should do that.
It's of any assistance, there's a presumed amount that you have to pay unless you otherwise demonstrate in the
Okay.
Illinois tax.
See, another good reason to buy locally. None of this is a problem. If we just all buy locally, it's solved. They do it for us, right? I knew there was,
Well
I knew
said.
there was a piece of good news here. Okay,
So-
all right.
Okay. Any other comments on the various pieces of information that we were provided? Next item is opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee. This is on Finance Committee matters. The City Council's meeting in probably 5 minutes or less. Okay, there being none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. And now I'm going to switch chairs with Alderman Waldman, and I'm told.